You are listening to the Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, where it's all about education, support, and coaching for adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Xena, a late diagnosed ADHDer, here to help you unpack the challenges, frustrations, and the positive side of living with ADHD. With my no BS approach, I'll help you to better understand your unique ADHD brain and how you can work with it to feel better, increase your self-confidence, improve your relationships, and ultimately achieve your goals. Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited for this conversation today about boundaries. But before we dive in, I have a funny I thought I would share with you. It's funny now. I tell you what, it was not funny at the time. So my partner and I did the grocery shopping Saturday morning, and we had to get some light bulbs, and we've got some weird energy saver bulbs in the ceiling, and they're like $10 each or whatever. And we didn't know exactly which ones they were, but we knew they were screw-in, but we didn't know what is it wattage, what size we needed, really. And so I said to my partner, let's just grab these $1.50 screw-in 100-watt bulbs. Like, I had these growing up. They'll be absolutely fine. Like, that'll do the job until we know exactly what we need. So anyway, we grab these bulbs, we get home, unpack the groceries, and my partner goes to put these light bulbs in the ceiling, and he puts them in. And I'm just like watching him out the corner of my eye, and he's like, testing them and seeing how hot they get and all of this. And then he takes them out the ceiling. I was like, what are you doing? He's like, no, we're not using them. I was like, what? He's like, no, they get too hot. I'm not happy with it. I don't want them to burn the house down. And this is for me, I'm like, are you kidding me? I grew up with these bulbs. They're just standard bulbs that go in the ceiling. They're not going to burn the house down, obviously. They can't be selling products that are going to burn the house down, but my partner was adamant. He's like, no way. So anyway, we just went without light bulbs for a few days. But you know what? It frustrated me no end at the time. I was like, are you serious? We can't just use these bulbs? And he was like, no, I will go and buy the other ones. But you can just imagine the ADHD frustration, that played out in my head for a little while. Yeah. Now it's just funny. Now I think about it and I'm like, oh, that's pretty funny. That bothered me so much. We're talking about light bulbs, and it wasn't like we were living in the dark. You've got 4 in the lounge and then 4 in the dining room, and it was 1 in each area was out. So it was noticeable, but not terrible. But you know what? It frustrated me so much. My brain wanted to think about it so much. But here we are. I've moved on, and I'm pretty sure they've been replaced. I actually haven't thought about it. I just made a note to tell you guys because I was like, I'm sure you'll appreciate it. So before I dive into this, I just wanted to remind you, if you are enjoying the podcast, I would be so incredibly grateful if you would share it with a friend, somebody who you know who is, an ADHDer or exploring an ADHD diagnosis. And as well, if you would leave us a 5-star review, so grateful. That does help us to find other adults with ADHD and share the goodness with them. So thank you. I really do appreciate each of you who take the time to do that. So over the weekend, I had lunch with a group of friends. And whilst chatting to one friend, Jen, she was telling me about how she was working with a PT. And I hadn't seen her for ages, and she was looking really good. And she was saying how she feels really strong, the strongest she's ever felt. And I asked her, oh, wow, who are you working with? Who's your PT? And it turns out that this personal trainer was somebody that many years ago, myself and another friend had worked with. Now, I chose to stop going to this particular PT because she was a gossip. She was always talking about other people and up in their business, and I just didn't like it. Okay. So I mentioned this to Jen, and I said how I'd stopped going, and I found that she was, quite, keen to talk about everybody else. And she told me how she'd been really clear up front and set a boundary right off the bat that she was a very private person. She did not wish to talk about her life, and she did not want to talk about or engage in other people's lives and participate in gossip. Now, she told me she'd had to remind the PT one time about this boundary, and then that was it. She said it has been great and she's had absolutely no issues. what Jen demonstrated to me is such a great example of setting a boundary. And it also reminded me of how uncomfortable I had been years ago with this PT, so much so that I didn't communicate my boundary. I didn't even tell her about it. I just stopped going. Rather than saying anything, I had this passive boundary. I just kind of expected her to know, but I didn't communicate it. She didn't know, right? So I avoided having an uncomfortable conversation. And in doing so, I never resolved the underlying issue in that relationship with that person, right? Isn't that interesting? In the words of Brené Brown, I love me some Brené Brown. She says, healthy boundaries are what's okay and what's not okay. And in my experience, most adults with ADHD struggle with boundaries. So let's talk about that. Why is that? So here's why I think this is often a challenge for us. So firstly, most of us were not taught what a boundary is, why it's important, how to set one, how to uphold it in our lives, right? There was no class for that in school, right? We go to maths, we go to science, we go to English, what have you, but there was no class that taught us about boundaries and how to use them and what a healthy boundary is, okay? So for most of us, this was never really explained. Also, it probably wasn't modeled to you. So, and I'll share a story about my family and what I kind of observed growing up. But for most of us, we were raised by parents who didn't have clear or healthy boundaries, and potentially by parents who were quite emotionally immature. Another reason why this can be difficult for adults with ADHD is because of some of the challenges we have with ADHD. We were trying so hard to fit in, especially as kids. It can feel like life or death as a child to not fit in when you stand out and you're picked on, or in class when you're told you're not doing it right and you need to try harder. That can feel awful. So of course, we were trying so hard just to fit in, to keep up, to do what everybody else was doing. So then we learned to doubt or second guess our own feelings and our own needs. And another reason why it can be really hard for us to set boundaries is because most adults with ADHD, they feel pretty bad about themselves, right? They've got low self-esteem, beat themselves up. This is something I talk about a lot on this podcast, and therefore don't feel confident when it comes to setting a boundary, or they might think that they need to change. They might think, and this makes me so sad, they sometimes think that they are the problem, and therefore they don't think that they can or should set a boundary, when in actual fact, so often there is a boundary issue. So growing up, I got some very confusing messages about boundaries from my family. So I witnessed a lot of the silent treatment between my parents, a lot of yelling, a lot of, kind of silent expectations without communicating things, showing that they were upset, but then not saying anything, a lot of threats. I would hear things like, I'm not going to talk to you if you can't change, and you need to get over yourself, and, when I call on the phone, you need to answer. And it was so much more about trying to control the other person rather than, what a boundary truly is, which is about protecting us in our space. It's not about control, right? Because control is about making somebody else do something and trying to manage them in their space. It's actually very different. Boundaries are about just protecting us in our space. So a boundary is what we set to protect our own mental, emotional, and physical well-being. So we can't talk about boundaries, or at least I can't. I can't talk about boundaries without talking about the work of Nidra Glover Tawwab. And in particular, her book, which is called Set Boundaries and Find Peace. Now, I recommend that book to so many of my clients, okay? And I'm actually going to include many of the things that I have learned from her in this episode today. I will also make a mention of that book in the show notes, and I will link to her website because I highly, highly, highly recommend that if boundaries is something that you are struggling with and you want to address in your life, all right? So in her words, in the words of Nidra, a lack of boundaries underlies most relationship issues. Imagine being able to clearly communicate what is okay and what's not okay for you. Imagine having relationships where people respected you and what you need. Imagine being able to advocate for yourself without feeling guilty for speaking up. The root of self-care is setting boundaries. I'm going to say that again. The root of self-care is setting boundaries. It's about saying no to something in order to say yes to your own emotional, physical, and mental well-being. When we don't have healthy boundaries, our well-being is the price. So let's go through some examples of boundaries in relationships. Number 1, letting your boss know or your clients know that you will not be responding to emails on evenings or weekends. Number 2, requesting a friend no longer vent to you or, complain to you about another friend. Number 3, asking your mother to call if she would like to stop in and visit your home, right? Rather than just turning up, you say, ask her to call if she wants to come by. I'm actually working with a client. This reminds me of another example. I'm working with a client at present who has got beautiful boundaries at work. So she said to me when she actually applied for this position a couple of years back, she was really clear about what was okay and not okay for her in a work setting because she'd had some difficulties in the past. And she let her employer know, hey, I've got 2 kids. I will need to work from home at times. I need a bit of flexibility with that. I sometimes will need to leave early to collect the kids. And also, I'm not going to work late nights and weekends because I have a family and commitments. And she has upheld those boundaries and is a valued and respected member of the team. I'll give you another example actually of boundaries. In a couple of weeks, my partner and I, we are going to a 40th birthday party for one of his friends. And we had a conversation about this, about what we're both okay with and not okay with for this event, because I'm just not a party person, right? I'm not a late night party person, and he knows that. And so he wants to stay, he wants to, have a few drinks and hang out with his friends, and he'll probably come home like after midnight. Now, I want to have 2 drinks and I want to come home probably around 9 o'clock and drive home. And we have agreed he will get an Uber and come home when he's ready. And I'm going to have my 2 drinks and then drive home when I'm ready to leave. I don't like late nights. I don't like being around drunk people. Just something that I don't like. So, and this makes me think of another point that I had with a client recently. We don't have to justify our boundaries, right? I don't like late nights and I don't like being around drunk people. I don't actually have to justify that. Isn't that so good to know, right? That simply is a boundary that I have. I'm not going to do that. So I'm often the first person who leaves, a dinner out with friends, or I'm often the first person to leave a wedding or a party, because that's a boundary I have, and I'm so okay with that. Healthy boundaries promote balance in our lives, and they foster healthy relationships. Now, I know from experience, my friends, I know setting boundaries can feel scary and hard. The number one reason that people avoid setting boundaries is fear of someone getting mad at them. So you bet we're going to talk about that as well. But first, let's talk about how do we know when we need to set a boundary? So first of all, how you feel, right? Have you ever felt resentment? Ugh. Nobody likes to feel that. But resentment is a clear indicator of a boundary violation. Anytime you feel resentment, somebody in your life is overstepping a boundary. So I'll give you an example of this. When my partner and I moved in together a few years back, I was doing most of the cooking and the cleaning. And I'll tell you what, I got over that shit real quick. I started to feel a ton of resentment. Like, especially when I would go into the bathroom after I had just cleaned the bathroom, and then I would find his whiskers, because like he'd shaved his beard or whatever, and I would find tiny little whiskers all in the sink. Damn, I would lose my shit. So we talked about it, right? I said, hey, I'm no longer going to do so much cleaning, right? This is what I'm happy with. I'm happy to do the bathrooms and the kitchen, like a real good deep clean in the kitchen once a week. And what he does is he does the vacuuming, and he'll do that a few times per week, a full house clean like once a week. He'll empty the dishwasher when the kids aren't here. He also mops the floors every few weeks and like cleans the showers when they need cleaning. So we just came up with a plan, and it's actually worked really well. So again, resentment is a key indicator of a boundary being violated. It's a key indicator that there is an opportunity for a boundary to be set. Again, emotions are a clear signal, okay, of our boundaries being violated. So you may experience anger or bitterness or perhaps anxiety or another form of discomfort. And you may notice that as more sensations in your body, like that tightness or tension or resistance or reluctance. That might be showing you, hey, alarm bells, there's a boundary being crossed here. In the words of Brené Brown, healthy boundaries is choosing discomfort over resentment. I'm going to say that again because I think it's so good. Healthy boundaries is choosing discomfort over resentment. And it's always short-term discomfort over long-term resentment. So here are some key indicators that it's time to set some boundaries, my friend. If you're feeling overwhelmed, all right, we've got a couple of really good podcasts here about overwhelm. If you are feeling overwhelmed, it is time to set boundaries. If you feel resentful towards people asking you for help, and if you avoid calls or interactions with people who may want to ask you for something, right? If you're dodging calls, yeah, it's probably a sign. If you make comments about, having helped other people but getting nothing in return, that's a sign. If you feel burned out or exhausted all the time, my friend, boundaries prevent burnout. If you're daydreaming about dropping everything and disappearing, I used to daydream, this is years ago back when I was working in travel, I used to daydream about getting sick. Because if I was sick, I wouldn't be able to go to work. That was a clear sign that I needed some serious boundaries. Yeah. And if you have no time for yourself, again, a key indicator that it's time to set some boundaries. As I said, boundaries prevent burnout. And we know as adults with ADHD, we are way more prone to experiencing burnout. When we don't have healthy when we don't have healthy boundaries, our well-being is the price. Again, the root of self-care is setting boundaries. It's saying no to something in order to say yes to ourselves, to say yes to our emotional, physical, and mental well-being. So, why is it that setting boundaries can be so hard? I'll tell you what, from personal experience, I can say setting boundaries with family, like the people who raised us and spent a lot of time with us, like that could also be siblings, right? the people who have spent a lot of time with growing up, those who have, treated us a certain way for our whole lives. That could even be like a husband, a wife, a partner whom you have been with for a long period of time, right? They just expect us to be a certain type of person for them, and they, will expect us to put up with certain things or keep being who we've always been for them. So yeah, boundaries with those people, it can be hard, my friends. So let's talk about why. The number one reason, as I said before, the number one reason people avoid setting boundaries is fear of someone getting mad at them, of not wanting to have an uncomfortable conversation. And another really important reason why boundaries can be so hard is because we are talked out of being ourselves. I think that's such a powerful thing to hear. And if you listened to last week's episode where we talked about social conditioning and the messages we've received growing up that teach us who we think we should be in the world and what we think we should do or achieve or become, it makes so much sense, right? Boundaries can be so difficult because we are talked out of being ourselves. So let's kind of explore what this means. The other day, I met a friend at the beach with her daughter, who I think is about 4 years old. And this kid is like all kids of that age, like no filter. I love that about young kids when they're that age where they just say what they are thinking and they ask for what they want. Such a good age. So for example, like this little girl said, what's that spot on your face? And was your face smooth like mine once upon a time? And I don't want to play in the water. I'm hungry, right? Like just saying it like it is, asking questions like they really want to ask, But here's the interesting thing, right? As adults, we tell kids, don't talk like that, it's rude. Or, we tell them, oh no, keep those thoughts inside your head. We don't say things like that out loud. I remember hearing that from my parents. And we tell kids that's okay or that's not okay. And we say, no, you're fine. You're not hungry. You've just eaten, right? As adults, we do what we were taught when it comes to raising kids, right? We try to make our kids fit in like we were made to fit in. We try to make them more comfortable and digestible for other people. But although this is so well intended and we don't realize we're doing it, what happened for all of us growing up is we grew up being told to fit into this box. Okay, you should be like this, not like that. And so what happens is we have started to question or doubt our own feelings and our own needs if they don't line up with being in that box. We try to ignore how we think or how we feel if it doesn't fit a certain way, right? We start to think, oh, I shouldn't feel that way. But the reality is that none of us fit into a box. All humans need different boundaries. Okay? I'm going to say that again. All humans need different boundaries, but all humans need boundaries. So as adults with ADHD, we may need different boundaries to people who don't have ADHD. The reality is that every single human being on the planet needs boundaries in order to live a healthy and balanced life. And the truth is, yes, setting boundaries, it's not always easy, but that short-term discomfort for the long-term healthy relationship is worth it every single time. I read this beautiful quote on Instagram the other day, and I'm not sure who said it. And it said this: you can be a kind person and still say no. Prioritize your needs. Set boundaries. Disagree with people. Be honest. Challenge poor behavior. Walk away from toxic environments. Make mistakes. stand up for yourself, and protect your time and space. Again, you can be a kind person and do all of those things. Boundaries help us live our lives in line with our values and in line with our priorities. They are a type of self-care, okay? So boundaries are a type of self-care and a skill that we keep learning, keep practicing and improving. And again, they're an important part of any type of relationship, whether it's with our kids, our boss at work, our co-workers, our partner, our parents, our brothers and sisters, friends. They're an important part of any relationship in our life. And like I said, it's a skill, right? Setting boundaries is a skill that we can learn. And this is something I'm still learning. It has only been in the last few years, I would say the last probably 4 years, that I have actively worked on setting and communicating boundaries and practicing this skill. So in saying that, I think I'm relatively new to it still. Yeah. And it is a skill we can learn. A lot like, learning to play a musical instrument, right? You can watch videos and you can, go on YouTube and watch other people doing it. You can listen to podcasts like this, but until you pick up the guitar and you start to play, you can't learn how to play the guitar. You can't learn and enjoy the rewards that come from playing the guitar. And the more you practice, the more you pick it up and you play it, the better you get. You keep learning and improving and learning new things, and it gets easier and easier. Right? Boundaries and learning this skill, it's exactly the same. In the words of Brené Brown, again, love me some Brené, setting boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. My friend, you deserve to have healthy boundaries and happy, loving relationships. You deserve to be who you are and to communicate what you need from the people in your life. Remember, the root of self-care is setting boundaries. It is saying no to something else in order to say yes to your own emotional, physical, and mental well-being. All right, my friends, go out there today, go out there this week and practice boundaries. And I would love to hear from you. Come and hang out with me on Instagram, navigating.adult.adhd, the same name as this podcast, and tell me how you're going with boundaries. Tell me how you're getting on. Tell me all the things. I love to hear from you guys. And just know, anytime you reach out to me, whether it's on social media or you send me an email, I reply. I personally reply to every single message I receive. All right, my friends. Huge love to you all. Take care out there. I'll speak to you soon. If you are loving what you're learning here on the podcast, but you still feel like your ADHD is holding you back, I can help. Using evidence-based coaching tools and my own experiences, I'll help you to manage your emotions and feel better, to increase your productivity, grow your self-confidence, and create the life that you were meant for. Visit xenajones.com/thrive and schedule an ADHD support session to get started.